Good morning, everybody. My name is David Percy. I hold the Borden Ladner Gervais Chair in Energy Law and Policy at the University of Alberta. Welcome to the session on integrated water resource management in the Bow River. We have a short introduction by video.
When we make decisions on sustainable water management, it's best that we take an approach that considers the entire watershed or ecosystem. We'll look at a specific case study on the Bow River here in Alberta to see the range of opportunities for integrated decision-making at a watershed level. This session will investigate how a system-wide watershed approach can improve and sustain water quality while ensuring adequate water supplies for residential and industrial purposes. We'll also explore some of the mechanisms to implement these initiatives.
Well, the introductory video gives you a brief glimpse of how complex the Bow River is. And also I'm aware that many of you have taken a tour of the Bow River or parts of the Bow River. It's a beautiful in many places dramatic, creates a beautiful in many places dramatic landscape. I want to introduce the session by taking what I think is a much more interesting tour of the Bow River, but I'm in a minority of one on this, because I'd like to take you on a brief legal tour of the Bow River. The first step, of course, is a national park. It arises in Banff National Park, and that harks back to the day when the federal government owned all public lands and natural resources in Western Canada. And Banff National Park was created during that period of federal ownership. It was only in 1930 that the provinces obtained rights over natural resources, and all licenses issued by the federal government during that period have to be respected by the province. So there's a big federal imprint on this river. The next step we note as we leave the park, the next obvious feature of the river from a legal viewpoint, of course, is hydroelectric power plants, because these were created by Calgary Power in the very early stages of Alberta's development at the beginning of the last century, and they were all, or almost all, completely licensed by the federal government during its days as steward of the natural resources of this part of the world. While we're in the upper part of the basin, it's also interesting to note that we first begin to encounter Indian reserves, which are also a significant part of the basin. Indeed, when you combine Indian reserves and national parks, it's said that 40% of the land through which the main stem of the Bow River flows is in fact, remains in federal jurisdiction, because federal government has jurisdiction over parks and Indian reserves. The Indian reserves are also an important source of potential water rights and of the duty of those who are involved in the river to consult with Aboriginal interests when major projects or even major plans are contemplated. We move downriver to this burgeoning city of Calgary. We sort of ignore the suspiciously vividly green golf courses on the way, which have sprung up in large numbers. And we arrive to the much browner city of Calgary, which is a very large and expanding city on what is really a very small river, relatively, that is very heavily allocated. After Calgary, the next legal features are three major irrigation districts, with very senior water licenses, also dating back, in many cases, to the early part of the last century. The irrigation districts themselves account for more than 90% of the consumptive use of water in the basin. Then we finally reach the confluence with the Oldman River, and that's the end of the Bow River, but not the end of its legal problems. Because when the flow combines with the Oldman River, it then goes to the final important legal feature, Saskatchewan. And under our only, in Canada, interprovincial water compact, of course, we are obliged to pass 50% of the natural flow of the river system, measured slightly across the border, into Saskatchewan. So when we just take that look at the legal landscape, I would actually suggest it is far more legally complex than any other river basin in the province, in the same way it is that its pressures of development create more complexity than with any other river in the province. Now, today's panel, I'm going to introduce briefly because they will be giving a continuous presentation. So to my immediate left is Mike Kelly, very well known in water management in Alberta. He retired from TransAlta a few years ago, where he was head of environmental health and safety. Since then, he's focused on water management in southern Alberta. He was project coordinator for the Bow River project, and I'll say from personal experience, he knows more about the flow of the Bow River from a practical level than anyone else in the province. Next to Mike is Dan Shear. Dan holds a PhD with distinction from Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. He was technical director and cooperative operations director for the Potomac River Commission. He's founder and president of Hydrologics and specializes in water resource systems analysis and computer-aided dispute resolution. To the left of Dan is Mike Shear. Mike is a chip off the old block. He holds bachelor's degrees in ecology and agriculture and a master's degree in public policy from the University of Maryland. He's worked with Hydrologics for 6 years, starting off by focusing on performance measures before moving on to collaborative modeling exercises. And on my far left is Mike Nemeth. Mike is a project specialist at WaterSmart Solutions. He supports and manages a variety of surface and groundwater projects related to water management and use in Alberta. Mike began building his water resource experience through his work with Syncrude Canada, the Alberta Water Research Institute, and the Water and Environmental Hub. Now, this will be a continuous presentation. I'm going to step off the platform because if I sit here, I'll probably fall off the platform. So I'm just going to hand you over to Mike Young, and I'll reappear at the end of the formal presentations. Mike Kelly. I keep calling you Mike Young.
That's all right. Thank you, David. That was great. Great introduction and a great tour of the Bow River from a legal perspective. I also want to thank, before I start, Dr. Glick for setting the stage for this, because what we're going to talk about really is a project to implement the concept of peak water. And what we've tried to do is implement some policies that can produce the peak water utility notion that you had in one of your slides. Our objective was, just as a quote from the report, maximize the overall economic, ecological, and social utility of the water available for management in the Bow River Basin. I think that kind of hits where you were trying to take us this morning. To do that, a collaborative process was established, and we kind of facilitated it. Basically, the people here to my left, and the report, and the final report was unanimously accepted. And we're all going to go through some of the recommendations, but I think you'll see that it kind of strikes home. So. We're going to tell you a little bit about the who, what, where, when, why kind of thing of what this project was all about, and it's a little bit more about kind of where the rubber hits the road in terms of the peak water notion. But I don't know which direction to. There we go. So this is the structure of our discussion. I'm not going to spend much time on it. In fact, I'm going to go pretty fast through this presentation, as I think we all are, because we do want to discuss this with you as opposed to simply make a presentation and we all go have lunch, because I think there's a whole lot of questions that we would all like to hear from you, and that's how we learn and improve as to what we have done to this point. So just a quick overview of the Bow River Basin, not from a legal standpoint, but from a topological standpoint, I guess you could say. The key point really is in the lower left there, the little teardrop. About 80% of the water flow in the Bow River comes from snowmelt. So it's I don't know, there are other rivers, I'm sure, that are similar to that along the foothills of the Rockies, but that's an incredible piece of information in terms of how you want to manage that river. It goes from very dry in many times of the year to peak flood when everything melts at once, which it often does. And you can see the different the different ecological zones that we're in, and it goes all the way down to a very, very dry semi-arid area where a lot of the irrigation takes place. Why do we get together? There's a whole lot of reasons. These are some of them. There's a lot of issues related to the Bow River that require some management. I'm not going to go through all of these again. Make notes if you want to ask questions and get more elaboration on some of the points in there. This is actually the South Saskatchewan River downstream from the confluence of the Bow and the Oldman, and the initial part of the several years here is well measured. It's been measured from about 1911, I think, is when the first hydro dam went in on the Bow, and you can see here this little dip below. The line, I guess I should explain the whole thing, is based on tree ring data. There's some real data, and then further back, going obviously to 1400, is based on tree ring data. And we all know there's some issues around tree ring data, but it gives you a pretty good indication of what the weather patterns might have been like back then. And we can kind of ground truth it a little bit as we go through, because this is the dirty 30s. These are actually real measurements. When you get back here, this piece here is when there was an expedition called the Palliser expedition that came through this part of the world. And when they came through, the luck would have it, they were in an extremely dry period. He went back to central Canada and said, no, don't bother sending any settlers. There's really nothing here. It's a desert. You can't grow anything. Forget about it. Shortly thereafter, in this little wet period here, there was another expedition came through and said, hey, this is green. It's a garden of paradise. Bring the settlers. And so that was about the time that the railway was coming through here. And so an awful lot of settlers did actually come here. And then, of course, shortly thereafter, they had the dirty 30s, and a third of them had to move away for lack of water. So when you go back, you can see that the pattern here is that it's extremely variable, from huge floods to long dry periods. And in some cases, even going back to this period here, there were about 50 years of drought here, 50 years, and not the 1 or 2 that we've seen lately. So we've been pretty fortunate over the last 100 years or so, and we hope that continues, but we can't really count on it. The point of this slide really is it's only prudent for the people who live in this area to figure out how to manage water and to anticipate, hopefully prevent, at least mitigate some of the effects that are undoubtedly going to take place, whether there's a human-caused climate change or whether we just simply get more of the natural same. This has already been gone over a bit, I think, but this is the allocation of water, water use. Very a small portion of it is municipal use. Most of it goes to irrigation downstream from Calgary. This slide is really just to show that I don't think it's practical or feasible to think that we're going to take a whole lot of water out of irrigation and use it for a whole bunch of other purposes. Irrigation districts in the province have improved their efficiency tremendously over the past 20 and 30 years, and they intend to do more of that in the future. So they don't intend to use more water, but they certainly are going to use that water to increase food production. And in a world of 7 billion and growing quickly, that's a really critical piece of our economy, but also I think perhaps even a moral obligation to continue to produce food as efficiently as we can. The environmental side of why we did this. This is just one example. There are a number of others. This is Lower Kananaskis Lake in October. You can almost see the trout jumping and frolicking, having a good old time. This is the picture from the same place in April. That's how reservoirs are generally managed when you use them for power generation and not really very many other things. So one of the things, there are a number of very large reservoirs upstream of Calgary. This one is a relatively small one. It's one that's had quite a bit of research done on it in terms of the feasibility of actually levelizing it so that it looks like this year-round, except when the ice is on it, which is quite a long time. So that's another reason for the project that we undertook. How did we think we could do this? Are we so smart that we can actually fix a number of the things? Well, we're not really that smart, but the issue is because since 1911 the river has been managed by a number of hydro dams. It's a very managed river. As you can see here, I'm not going to go through all the details of this hydrograph. It's an annual water flow average over 38 years, showing that the natural flow, the calculated natural flow, is this dotted line. You can obviously see the big flood event that takes place every year. But the more important thing for the city of Calgary to even exist requires this approximate slightly more than 2 times the natural flow in the wintertime. That additional flow is required for the city of Calgary to actually even operate its water treatment facilities and to put its effluent in the river without violating a number of important environmental criteria. So I think David pointed out the river is actually too small for what it's trying to support. So it has been over the past 100 years extremely managed river. So what we tried to do, what we looked at doing was how much can you change this variation and actually manage it for purposes other than power generation, which has been essentially its sole purpose for the past 100 years. Before I leave this slide, you can see here, and this is in cubic feet per second, pardon my old-fashioned view. You can look at the CMS on this side, but the CFS you see on an average year is about 7,000 cubic feet per second at peak flow. In 2005, when we had a bit of a flood, this actual flow through Calgary peaked at 28,000, not 7,000, so it's up wherever it would be around in here. and it was calculated that had the last rainstorm not gone over the Bow Basin and went into the North Saskatchewan Basin, or actually the Red Deer Basin, that this number here, instead of 7,000, would have been 40,000. So it could have been really a disastrous year for downtown Calgary, perhaps even where we're at. We may have been walking knee-deep in water. So there's a lot of, we really dodged a bullet there. We may not dodge it next time. These are the participants in the project. These participants hold over 95% of the licensed water in the river. So we had all of the big players. In the course of our project, we just assumed that all the junior license holders would get all the water that their licenses required in any given year, because it's relative to what these guys do. It's relatively small. We had a couple of environmental groups and so forth, but we had all of the big, all of the big municipalities, including, of course, the city and 3 counties, I guess, and the Calgary Regional Partnership, for those of you who don't know, is a group of about 17 municipalities surrounding Calgary. So we had very widespread participation. A lot of very senior people gave us a tremendous amount of time, or gave themselves a tremendous amount of time in terms of coming up with what the study results were. We established these 10 principles early in the game, kind of built them into our terms of reference, actually, because there are a number of things that we wanted to create boundaries around this collaborative agreement. When you have a lot of people who have very conflicting interests and different perspectives on the world, you need to establish a set of principles and a decision-making process, which we did. Again, I'm not going to go through those. What it was really all about, a collaborative project of the stakeholders holding 95% of the water. The objective was to model the Bow and all the tributaries for environmental sustainability improvement, and also to enhance the social and economic development in the region, because it's a very rapidly growing region from a population and economic development standpoint. The process was intensive data review. Some of these other guys are going to talk about that in more detail. Interactive modeling with the model of OASIS that one of these guys will be talking about as well. And we had a tremendous number of different types of data. So we had everything from the historic data from Alberta Environment on flows. We had data from TransAlta. We had the ISO, the Alberta Electric System Operator, to get some idea of how much it might cost to do this, because there would be a reduction, not in total generation, but in the timing of generation, and therefore the profitability of that generation. So that's pretty much what we did. And I'll turn it over to Mike and Dan, who are both going to talk in a tag team manner, as we did throughout the whole process, really.
Thank you. Of course, we're stepping on each other's feet here, but I'm going to start out just to give you a quick overview of the model here. We've got, I'm going to stick with the theme of pointing right. We've got, there's a pointer in here. I'm holding it backwards. There we go. All right. So we've got several sort of major sections of the model. This is just the map of the Bow River, as Mike pointed out. Okay, we've got a couple of zoom-ins, sort of. So the first major section, as Mike talked about, is the hydropower area here. Then we've got Calgary, then the irrigation districts, WID, EID, and, BRID, and then EID. And then we've sort of lumped all the junior licenses together. So that's sort of 4 major sections: the hydropower, the municipal, the river users, and then the irrigation guys, okay? And so environmental, so Mike talked briefly about all of the different problems that we face: closed basin, everybody knows Calgary's growing like nobody's business, M&I pressures are getting to be, environmental flows, the gamut of issues.
In order to build a model for computer-aided dispute resolution, you have to represent the interests of the stakeholders, and the stakeholders have to believe the model. So in the development of this model, some of the people who helped develop this model are in this room, and we are very grateful. Reviewed all the data, reviewed the operations, and made sure that it actually represented the current operating situation in the river.
But we'll go a little bit more into how we did that momentarily. So, Mike didn't really talk about this, but we had a unique opportunity as hydropower was replacing some of their infrastructure, where we could basically make an inroad into policy, right? If you change the infrastructure to meet the new demands of managing a river, then you can maintain a lot of efficiency or increase efficiency, but basically put yourself in a good position to take advantage of what we want to do. Foresight's great, right? So we gave us about 6 months to do what our company normally does in 2 years, which meant I was up here a lot. And I love Calgary, so that's great. So what we do, we follow what's called, over the course of the last 3 years, it's had at least half a dozen names. You can call it computer-aided negotiations. You can call it computer-aided dispute resolution. You can call it computer modeling for decision support, whatever you want to call it. It's collaborative modeling. It's everybody working together. And the way we do that, there's a lot of different methods for doing it, but the way we do that is we follow 4 basic phases. We start out with performance measures, then we build the model, then we develop alternatives, and finally, we reach consensus. But that sort of works itself into the earlier parts. And to reiterate what Mike said earlier, we preconditioned a win-win approach. Nobody at the end of the process was allowed to be any worse off than they were under the current policy. Now, important to note, we didn't define worse off. They defined worse off for themselves. That allows you to do trade-offs, which is important. We'll get to that more momentarily.
And water management, fortunately, is rarely a zero-sum game. The timing of releases is as important as the quantity of the releases, and this allows you, by changing the timing, to produce benefits for all parties whilst maintaining benefits for other parties. Quality is also a very important part of most management decisions, and if you can improve the quality while reducing the quantity a little bit, you sometimes have stakeholders who win big while getting a little less water. Each stakeholder is likely to have many management objectives. So if a stakeholder loses a little on one, he can gain a lot on the other. And stakeholders themselves find out very quickly in these collaborative processes that they share a whole bunch of objectives, and that makes agreement a whole lot easier. So one of the most important points when you go into these collaborative processes is that people often bring to these collaborative processes a statement of a preference for a particular alternative. And what they find out when they really look at it is that stated alternative, that preference, really doesn't serve their interests. When that happens, they look for new alternatives, and they start looking for alternatives that can benefit the group as a whole.
Okay, so first step, performance measures. We only had 6 months to do a project that we wanted to take 2 years to do. Even so, we spent fully half the time strictly on performance measures, okay? This has a couple of things that happen. First off, you get a way to measure how you're doing, right? A robust suite of metrics. Obviously, you need that. But it goes a little deeper. When you have a group of people coming together representing very different interests, and as the group becomes more contentious, this becomes more important. There's a couple of things that happen. One, you put everybody in a room and you make the first rule, which is everybody gets as many performance measures as they want. We don't limit it. It's up to you. If you want to see it, we'll show it to you. Doing that before building the model lets us build a model that does that well. But it also gives the participants a chance to voice their interests and make everybody else listen to their interests. Again, the more contentious this is, the more important it is. Being heard is a huge part, especially when you have people at the table who aren't used to playing ball, right? So they get to say what they want, and they get to hear what everybody else wants. And the next step is to figure out what they really want. As Dan sort of alluded to, what you think you want may not be what you're actually after. So if you come into a negotiation, you say, well, I want the water. Okay, why do you want the water? Say you're a fish guy, right? I want the water for the fish. Okay, what does that mean? Well, I need the water for spawning. That's what's important to me, really. They manage themselves fine during the normal flows. Okay, so what do you need for spawning, right? Well, I really need water within this band, and I really need water in this timing. Okay, so all of a sudden, just in the performance measures section, okay, we haven't even talked about the model yet. Just in performance measures, you've already started to open up opportunity for agreement. Okay, and the more people do this with an audience, the more they get into it, the more they believe something can work. I mean, when we started this project, there was a lot of naysay, right? It's a huge goal, and people don't buy into that right off the bat, unless they're talking to Mike Kelly, because he's a phenomenal guy. But he got a tremendous amount of buy-in to start with, but that was only half the battle. Okay. So, about performance measures. Whatever you want, as I said, we give it to you. That doesn't mean you can actually affect it, okay? We can't make more water. We'd love to, but, I mean, we've got what we've got. That said, when you've got a model together, if you've got a performance measure that has no change, right? So say you want all the water all the time, fish guy, again, I'm picking on fish guys, so forgive me any biologists, this is not intentional. But if you're a fish guy and you say, you know, the fish really need this flow all year long, and then you run it through the model, and the model runs out of water in a month and a half, right? You can't give them that. That's an important lesson. And being able to demonstrate to that someone opens up a lot of opportunity. They realize, okay, I can't get what I want, so let's see what I can get, okay? And again, it's moving that sort of mentality into the cooperation.
It's very important that we shy away from using single composite scores. Often people want to say, okay, we need to have a single score, plus which of these alternatives is best. That score does not exist. Everyone has different preferences. In order to get collaborative agreement on an alternative, it is really important, we believe, to keep all of the performance measures in view of all of the participants so everyone can see what wins and by how much.
And to come back to our earlier point about everybody ending up at least as well as they are to start with, this is how they decide that. We don't say that every performance measure needs to go up at the end of the process. Some of them can go up, some of them come down. If that's okay to you, so you may get, for example, less water in a particular season, but you have a stabilized reservoir where now you can actually get a fishery going. Well, you've lost out a little bit on one performance measure, but you've gotten on the other. As long as you, or more importantly, the applicable stakeholder, feels that that's a worthwhile trade-off, fantastic. Right? We're not locking ourselves into what we think at the very beginning is going to be, because we don't know, right? It's impossible to know. So, real quick, a couple of the performance measures. Don't pay attention to the details. I'll go into those a little more later, but come on. Anybody? Bueller? I think I broke it. I got nothing. Anybody back there? Yeah. I killed the batteries. Well, I'll keep going while they sort this out. Oh, whoa, there we go. All right, we're good. Sorry. So, major performance measures. The first one, we decided that as an environmental measure, we wanted to improve the flow at Bassano. I've got in the square there. So we developed a way to measure different categories of flow, okay? So we were really concerned about these flows that were sort of right around the minimum. We wanted to improve that. And the way we tried to improve that was by increasing those flows to 400 to 800.
So the yellow flows are flows below 800 CFS. The green flows in different alternatives are above 800. They're from what, 800 to 1200 CFS.
800 to 1200, but we'll go
and the
into the
objective was to move the yellow bars to green bars. You can see as we improve the alternatives, more yellow move to more green.
But we'll go into the details on that later. Okay, so next, Lake Kananaskis elevation range. I talked a little bit about stabilizing the lake. This is our performance measure for that. Looking at how much time, what percentage of days it spends above 1663.5 and how much below. We had performance measures for the irrigation districts. We had just a general count of how many days they had a shortage. A shortage is when they get less water than they'd like to have. But more important to them was the consecutive day shortages, which isn't to say single day shortages were not important, but these consecutive day shortages where if you get 5 days of no water, that's going to be brutal for your crops. A lot of times, if you've got 1 day, you can recover from it. So we focused more on these consecutive days.
It's very important that the performance measures represent what really affects the stakeholders in real time in the real world.
The last one that I'm just going to show real quick, we had a lot more than these. I'm just showing you the major representative ones. TransAlta, hydropower. They're a big player. Didn't come to the table for perfectly valid reasons, but we couldn't ignore them. You can't pretend they're not there. You can't take all the water from TransAlta and say, well, we'll sort that out later and leave them, holding the entire bill. So we did our best to estimate their revenue and see how much impact we had on them.
Always on the left-hand side of these graphs is the base condition, which is the current operations of the facilities. and then you compare what's on the right to the left.
So, next step, building the model. Of course, that's not a trivial undertaking. As Dan mentioned earlier, we work with everybody the whole time, the whole way through. So the analogy that I make for this is like IKEA, okay? If you buy a chair, it's worth what you paid for it. If you spend 3 hours building that chair and cursing in an Allen wrench, it's worth a lot more to you, all right? So we keep the stakeholders involved in every step of the process. So as modelers, obviously, we have much more facility with the models. So we take a crack at it, we build it, we know it's wrong. You have to get used to in this job being told you're an idiot a lot. Now I'm used to it because I work with my dad. But moving on, we put together what we thought it worked with, showed it to them, and they said, naturally, you're an idiot. It doesn't work this way. So we say, okay, all right, how do we fix it? And then they tell us, and we fix it, and we get it wrong again. So we fix it again, and we get it wrong again, and we fix it again. So every time there's a problem, they see it, they correct it. And this takes a long time, and it takes you take quite a beating on your ego, but by the time you're done, everybody understands how the model works. At that point, if you do it right, they understand a little bit about the code, if not more. During some of the meetings, we would try and do these corrections on the fly, and I had irrigators correcting my syntax as I went, which is wonderful and terrifying. So, by keeping them involved during the process, they believe in the model, and they're invested in the model.
In fact, the model becomes a tool that all persons can use for decision making.
So in the language of negotiations, we basically turn the model into what's called an honest broker. Everybody believes, or at least believes that what the model produces is reasonable and appropriate. This gets all of the discussions about whether data is reliable or I don't believe what's coming out here out of the way, because we verified the model as we built it so that when we get to the next stage, we can actually talk about the things that are important to you. We can start to shift the discussion to values. You don't say, I don't believe the model's not working quite right. You can say, this is important to me. This is changing. How do we fix that? Or, great. So, you can do this process with any number of models. You can do this with PowerSim. You can do this with Stella. You could probably do it with ResSim. That said, for this particular application, the software suite that we use is extremely advantageous. If you're doing water models like this, Oasis, our tool, is very helpful. It's got a short runtime. It's only 15 minutes at most from clicking run to showing you results. That means that we can have a lot of quick iteration, a lot of spitballing. You can do things that you don't think are going to work because there's very little downside. We have operating rules that are readable comparatively. It's not like you're programming in Java. You're looking at something that if you work with water, you can puzzle your way through. If you have help, you can get through it even faster. And Stu Rue in the audience here has actually taken a crack at doing it on his own. When Dan tried to explain to him how to do it, Stu said, forget you, I'm just going to do it and learn it. And he did, to his credit. The other thing is that this code is easily modifiable. You can make changes on the fly. As I said, I would try and fix things during meetings when we had the whole stakeholders there. And I got to tell you, it's 13 minutes conversation versus 13 hours by phone versus 13 days by email. So this lets you keep things moving fast. Alternative development, right? This is the core of the goal, right? We want to come up with a new solution. We use, as I said, collaborative modeling. You get a bunch of people in a room, you get the model that they trust, and you start spitballing. We have a particular process for doing this, and it's very simple. It's exactly what I said. You get them all in a room, you sit them around a computer, you get one person who's extremely competent with the model, myself, Dan, Mike Nemeth here. We even pulled in a few extra people from home. And you just go through a repetitive process. You convene, you spitball stuff, you regroup, say what worked, what didn't, take the lessons from that, and you try it again. And you just go through this as fast as you can. And with 15-minute runtime, you can get through a lot of potential alternatives. And then at the end of the day, the modelers take it home. We really push the limits on it, sort of stretch it out, see what works, see how far we can get the gains to go. And then we bring it back and say, here's what you showed us. The initial ideas for when we started this process were definitely not where we ended up. At the beginning, we thought, oh, Spray Lake has this sort of artificial limitation. If only we could get it back to where it used to be, we can solve all the problems. Or, we really need to focus on improving the fisheries in Kananaskis. But in the end, what we ended up deciding on was a water bank. So the advantage of doing this with everybody in the same room and going through this process is that it rapidly shifts everyone to, instead of looking at each other as competing users, everybody starts to fight against the model, right? Now there is obviously still some awkward glances, long glances through the moonlight, but they realize that their opponent is the natural system or the managed system, but not each other, right? You've got what you've got, and let's figure out how to deal with it. So, about the water bank and about our final solution. We had
Excuse me, our final
well,
solution?
not final solution. I should mistake about the solution that we agreed to proceed with. There's still a lot of room for improvement. We have 4 major policy changes. 1, we said that the irrigation districts won't generally call from the junior licenses. Frankly, the junior licenses are peanuts relative to the irrigation districts. Okay. 2, we agreed to stabilize Lower Kananaskis Reservoir. The biologists in the group decided that that was a really major win for them. Being able to, as Mike showed you, one of the biologists suggested with the way it's managed now, we could turn it into an ATV park in the spring and just let people go nuts on it. So converting that into a lake that can actually sustain fish habitat is a huge win. The next part is stabilizing releases into the Kananaskis River. Same kind of thing. There's an opportunity for a fantastic trout fishery there. And then the last part, as I sort of alluded to, is a water bank. So the idea here is that the stakeholders would together basically buy a bucket from TransAlta, and then they would buy 10% of the inflows that allow that to refill. And so the bucket is sized at about 10% of TransAlta's storage, and it refills with about 10% of the inflows. Now, this is just an accounting measure. We're not actually buying physical space in Spray. TransAlta could put it wherever they wanted. But the important part is that there is that 10% refill. And Dan's going to talk a little bit more about that.
So what's a water bank? Improving the benefits in the Bow is all about timing, quite frankly, because all of the water from the TransAlta reservoirs goes downstream anyway. It's just a question of when. Water banks simply a volume of water that can be used to make releases as needed, rather than on a schedule that's solely for power. It's spread across all TAU reservoirs. It's very much like a bank account where your money is intermingled with everybody else's money. But you have to realize that bank account is useless unless you have something to put in it. So it's very important to negotiate as a part of your water bank what your revenue stream is. And normally in the United States, that's just a portion with a fraction of the inflows that's equal to the fraction of storage that's purchased. So this is a normal way of doing the accounting. May I have the next one? All right. So bank account is useless if nothing goes into it. A bank account is also useless if you can't take anything out of it, and you need some plan for making your withdrawals. And the withdrawals in the scheme that the stakeholders agreed to are used to maintain a flow of 800 CFS at Bassano almost all the time. You can't do it all the time because you can't predict what the flows are going to be several days in advance, and you have to manage several days in advance. When a withdrawal is made, TransAlta is required to release the amount that's called on in addition to what they would have released anyway. This requires that in order to make the bank account work, you have to have some kind of a formula that determines how much TransAlta would have released on any given day. That's a very difficult thing to determine in advance, but you can come up with a formula that is reasonably accurate and use it for accounting purposes, and that is what we've done. Operating rules, thus, are the key to operating water bank. The benefits from the bank depend on where the water is released. The impact on the generation is determined on when the water is released. Unfortunately, most of the water needs to be released with certainty at a time when power prices are likely to be high, so the impact is very small. And the amount in the bank depends on how you do the accounting. So negotiations for the water bank must focus on the operating rule. This shows how in a typical year the bank would be used. The white line is the storage in the bank. In most years, it will dip down in May to provide increases in flows at Bassano in May. The flows will then come fill up the bank, and then during the midsummer to the fall, the bank will empty. Only in very few years does it actually empty all the way. There's usually quite a bit of carryover storage. The inflow to the bank is shown by the green line. So in any...
Yellow line.
By the yellow line. And the total withdrawals from the bank are shown by the green line. And because you start out with about 45,000 acre-feet in this year, it is possible in any given year to withdraw more than $60,000 from the water bank. The maximum balance in your bank account, well, my checking account might be $2,000, but I tell you what, there's a whole lot more money goes through that in any given year, and that's exactly what this does.
So to be perfectly clear, we talked about, I said you rent a bucket and you buy 10% of the inflows. So you've got 10% of the inflows, which is the yellow line, and then you've got whatever you had in the bucket. That's how much water you can use in a year. Now, if you don't have any room in the bucket, you don't get any inflows. Okay?
Next.
So now, you saw these before briefly, but I'm going to talk about what we saw. We saw tremendous benefits, especially at Bassano. Now, we targeted the water bank for use only to improve flows at Bassano. And what did we do? We reduced these near-low flows by a factor of 5, and we replaced them with flows that were double the minimum by a factor of 5. That's huge. What other benefits do we have? Kananaskis is now stabilized within a 1 meter range. This is what the biologists suggested would work well. This is what we did. Again, phenomenal. We have more performance measures as well. I'm just giving you a selection. I've lost it. There we go. Consecutive day shortages. Again, this was our irrigation measure. We saw a substantial decrease. Not, mind-blowing like the Bassano, but still had a substantial benefit to them. Power revenue, right? This was TransAlta. These are the guys who weren't in the room. We looked at this as a means to say, is this something that we could sell to them, or are they going to look at this and say, oh, that's going to cost us a fortune, we can't ever do it? What we found with some coarse estimation was a relatively minor difference, okay? Now, don't look at the specific numbers. The numbers are wrong. Anytime you do with models, don't look at the specific numbers. Look at the magnitude and the direction. What did we see? We saw the direction of cost and the magnitude within rounding error, okay? So, what's the next step? Now that we've got these together, Mike Nemeth is going to talk more about this, but by building the trust during phase 1 and 2, consensus basically works itself as it goes along. Everybody starts to trust each other, believe in the results, and they start to work together. Then, when you have a solution, it's easy to sell it to them because they came up with it, okay? In this case, we aimed for consensus, but we got unanimity, which is fantastic. Everybody in the group agreed to sign off on this proposal, okay? The next step was to present this to the Minister of the Environment, favorably received, to say the least. It's pretty much easy to see why. If you're presenting something, not just to the minister, but really to any politician, you say, we are the groups who are fighting, we have come to an agreement, we have solved the hard problems, please take credit for it. That is an easy sale to make, okay? In fact, it was such an easy sale that other basins, including the South Saskatchewan, the larger South Saskatchewan River Basin, the Old Man, the Highwood Sheep, they're all interested in this. And so we're looking into continuing this process or restarting it with them initially with the idea of bonding them together in the end. Everybody wants to get a piece of this. We even went back to the stakeholders and we did a live drought exercise using this model. One of the great things about Oasis, if you'll forgive my momentary sales pitch again, is that we can also convert it into a week-by-week simulation mode where people can make live decisions. So we gave them a forecast. We said, what do you do now that when this is coming? And they said, here's what we do, and we ran the model. And then we took that back to improve our original operations. So lots of ways to improve these things. One more note. Okay. So, when you build this stuff, when you start this out, it is important to provide a product. You provide a recommendation at the end. Here's what we suggest. But just as important is the process here. You get people talking to each other, people conversing, people friendly with each other, or at least non-antagonistic, okay? You set up a group that can talk, that can manage, that can make these decisions long after you're gone, long after the model is obsolete. They work together. That is a big win, okay? Now, that is not a quantifiable bill of sale, but do not forget that. So making it happen.
In order to make it happen, we clearly demonstrated that coordinated operations can produce benefits for all the parties. And we have a demonstrated scheme that may not be the best scheme, but it works, and it makes the negotiations to implement this very worthwhile. There are a number of points that need to be negotiated before this can happen, and there is a will to negotiate these now, I believe. The first is an amount of storage. The second is a payment for that storage and for any lost generation revenue would need to go to TransAlta. There's no reason that they have to bear the cost of this, and it's not large. And a set of operating rules and limitations on both sides for the use of that storage and the filling of that storage that will ensure that this works. You will need an institutional arrangement to implement these rules, and over the course of my career, I've built a number of these institutions, or helped to build a number of these institutions. And finally, but not last, you need a procedure for modifying the rules as conditions change. Rules are not static. Your understanding of the system will change. The benefits you want to achieve will change. You need to put that into the institution. You need to measure success as well.
Rather than spend a whole lot of time on the operating rules, I think we've belabored that point pretty well. Please, during the question and answer session, come to us if you'd like to know more about that. I think we're going to jump right on to Mike Nemeth.
So just briefly, just to recap what Mike Scheer said, over the course of the project, we developed a base case scenario, which is essentially current operation rules and logic. Then the consortium developed 4 scenarios, one of which was called the preferred scenario. This involved, as Mike mentioned, the stabilization of Kananaskis. That was Lower Kananaskis Lake that Mike Kelly had talked about, and the Kananaskis River, as well as the establishment of a 60,000 acre-foot water bank. From the scenario, the preferred scenario, we were able to show the protection of water, or prove the protection of water sources for economic and municipal growth, healthier in-stream aquatic ecosystems, sufficient water for irrigation needs and potential expansion, as well as a renewal of the Kananaskis tourism, recreation and aquatic ecosystems, as well as achieve the Water for Life goals. Now, none of this is possible without a negotiated deal with TransAlta because they own these reservoirs upstream, but that is part of the next process of work that I'll touch on in a bit. So just briefly, I just wanted to touch on some of the Water for Life goals. The first one of a safe, secure drinking water supply for Albertans. We were able to show that there's adequate raw water supply for the next projected 50 years of growth in the Calgary region, as well as protected flow levels to protect fisheries and water quality standards downstream of Calgary. For the second Water for Life goal, and these Water for Life goals were established by the Alberta government, which is healthy aquatic ecosystems. We were able to show that dramatic improvements to the aquatic health in the Kananaskis River and the Lower Kananaskis Lake. Again, when you drain a lake from full to empty every year, you don't really have a chance to allow fish populations to establish themselves. And the third goal, which was reliable quality water supplies for the sustainable economy, we were able to show improved alignment of irrigation needs, environmental values, and upstream users. So this is a performance measure that we looked at when we did a stress test, which is basically looking at a scenario using the model. And this stress test was looking at what if the city of Calgary took their full allocation. So their current demand is about, their full allocation is 2.4 times their current demand. So if they took that allocation every year, how would that affect the system? And what we were able to show is that there was sufficient water for the Calgary region to take up to their full allocation, which is 2.4 times what they currently take. That assumes the 85% return flow that was modeled throughout all the scenarios. That's a number that the City of Calgary said that on average they return to the river every year. And what the most important thing is, and what this graph shows, is the two bars on the left. Those are the base case scenarios. So the base case scenario right there, and the base case scenario with the increased demand. And what you see is there are increases in shortages with the base case, but when you have the preferred scenario, the Western Irrigation District actually has no shortages. The Eastern Irrigation District, I believe, has fewer shortages, and the Bow River Irrigation District has increased shortages, but mostly those were attributed to a headworks problem, which can be solved by an infrastructure change. The most important part is that doubling the municipal demand through the Calgary region does not create unmanageable shortages for downstream users. So at a glance, the Bow River project, it concluded that the Bow River system can and should be managed differently. As Mike mentioned and showed you that hydrograph, it's already managed. So to manage it differently isn't a big stretch. You can integrate the integrated management of the Bow River system from headwaters to confluence is both achievable and realistic. There's substantial economic, environmental, and social benefits to remanaging the system, and a lot of those were pointed out throughout the process. And that the proposed changes, as Mike pointed out, the power graph, it can be implemented for minimal, or not minimal, but relatively modest costs and over a step-by-step process. It doesn't all have to happen at once, but things can be done step by step to improve the conditions. Mike Scheer also alluded to this earlier. After the Bow River project was completed, or that phase of the Bow River project completed in December 2010, in October of 2011, we reconvened the consortium and the participants that participated in the project, live simulation. And essentially the simulation got everyone together to test the rules that were developed during the Bow River project. And what we came up with as main objectives were to revisit and validate the BROM, which is the Bow River operational model that was developed, and the preferred scenario recommendations. So we wanted to validate what we actually recommended. Then to test and improve the proposed integrative operation rules, and then to identify and address consequences of implementing those rules. The simulation concluded that the Bow River operational model is realistic and valuable tool for understanding the river system. If you don't understand what you're trying to do, you can't change it properly. Exploring changes to prevent potential opportunities. Once you have a tool, you can use it to explore, the what-if scenarios. What if we did this? What if we did that? The simulation also confirmed that the Bow River can and should be managed differently. And in doing so, you can achieve many economic, environmental, and social benefits. There is value in stabilizing Kananaskis in terms of recreational and environmental benefits, as well as establishing a water bank, which Mike and Dan talked about. There's benefits for Basana, which is downstream in the very arid prairie portion of the watershed, as well as Kananaskis and elsewhere. And that the real-time management that was done in the simulation was actually better than what we call the Robo River, which is just the model running with our set of rules that were established. Obviously, the people in the basin can run the system better than any model could, and that was verified through the simulation. So although the rules that were established during the Bow River project in the preferred scenario were good, they can be improved upon by human interaction. So where are we now? Well, just this morning, the official announcement of the funding for the next phase of work was announced. The Climate Change Emissions Management Corporation, or the CCEMC, has funded a 2-year project that looks at expanding the Bow River or building on the Bow River work and looking specifically at adaptation, not just in the Bow, but also in the Oldman and the South Saskatchewan River basins. This work will build on and integrate existing data, tools, and knowledge to improve our shared understanding of the river system, to explore how to manage for a range of potential impacts on the river, support collaborative testing of adaptation responses, especially in the wake of whether it's climate change, human-induced, or whether it's just climate variability, and also land use changes, as well as increase our capacity for water resource management throughout the SSRB. So there's 4 phases that have been planned out for this project over the next 2 years. The first phase involves an initial assessment, kind of a scoping study of what's out there. This includes data, tools, capabilities, processes, and frameworks that are currently used for river management in the SSRB. We do this to hope to avoid duplication. We don't want to invent the wheel if somebody's already done so. And we also want to identify any critical gaps that there are. If there's data that we need that we don't have, we should look at getting it. If there's tools that need to be built, let's build them. The next phase is continuing and building upon what the Bow River project did. This is to help to advance the movement to integrated watershed management and also have a live test year on the river with the new proposed management rules involving TransAlta. Phase 3 will include the Oldman River Basin and the South Saskatchewan River, building a comprehensive model that was done on the Bow and with an adaptation focus. So basically we want to build the same model so that you can test the what-if scenarios. And finally, phase 4, development of foundational blocks. Essentially we want to begin to fill the critical gaps that are identified in the initial assessment in phase 1. So the next Bow River, different activities in the Bow River work that we're going to be doing. Some of the key ones are the integrated river management business case. A lot of people want to see what are the numbers behind remanaging the flows, what are the benefits, whether you agree with putting economics behind this or not. It's an important case when you're dealing with industry. Integrated river the Bow River Basin climate change modeling and adaptation strategies, not just looking at, well, what happens if we have climate change, or not having the climate change debate, but when climate change happens, or as it's happening, or when we get the variability from climate change, or whether it's natural variability, how do we adapt to it? And what can we do to mitigate the impact on the system from climate change? As well as capital infrastructure options, what other infrastructure that we can build or implement that'll help us adapt to climate change or variability, as well as the live test year. So what does this mean for a world and water of 7 billion? Well, the benefits of water management are largely local. That was very apparent throughout the course of the Bow River project. We had all the local stakeholders there. And the local stakeholders need to have a say in water management. They are the local experts. They know what they're talking about, and they know what the problems are and how to fix them. And if they don't, working together as a collaborative group, they can figure it out. Water management is not a zero-sum game. There are lots of benefits throughout the processes and outcomes that can be established through a process like this. And also that people of goodwill, when they come together, even if they have differing opinions or different priorities, they can come together in a collaborative group and make decisions, overcome obstacles, and improve things as needs be. So, thank you.
Great. We'll have an opportunity to formally thank the panel shortly, but first, this is a very stimulating presentation. We're going to take questions on this part and then move on to the next segment of the morning. So could you pass me the microphone, and we'll make it available to questioners. Who would like the microphone? There must be questions on this.
You mentioned that TransAlta wasn't at the table. I mean, you also talked about stabilizing flows in the Kananaskis River for trout. Don't they do hydro peaking there, and isn't that major priority for them? What's your take on that? Can those two things be mutually compatible?
Well, I mean, what we found was that even with stabilizing Kananaskis Lake, the cost to them in terms of power generation and ancillary services, by our estimations, was still very low.
I was thinking more about the stability of the river.
Joe, the stability of the river impacts the releases somewhat. There are two power plants. First, the Inner Lakes power plant, and then the plant below. The stability of the river was not managed to make it absolutely flat, but rather to limit the percentage change day to day, and to set some minimum flows to keep parts of the river wet. And those were judged by the environmental people who were on the panel to be sufficient to support the fishery. Not to make it ideal, but to support the fishery in the lower Kananaskis. They also produce a large amount of recreational benefits. So, by using upper Kananaskis as a source of peaking instead of lower Kananaskis as a source of peaking water, you lose some peaking water, but not a lot. And by having a reasonable set of requirements for the stabilization of the flow, you can do this with very little cost. It's a question of getting what you need rather than everything that you want.
And actually, just to make one clarification, there was no minimum flow for lower Kananaskis in this version. We did add one later that still had very small effects on TransAlta.
The power plant we're talking about is 15 megawatts.
Right.
So it's like 3 large wind turbines.
Right.
So it's not really that significant in the grand scope of things. On average in TransAlta, or sorry, not in the province of Alberta, it's around 9,000 megawatts at any given hour. So 15 really, they still get the same amount of power generation, just at a different time.
Will they accept this?
Well, it's all a matter of negotiation, so that's underway.
I shall use the moderator's privilege for a moment. One of the reasons that water management in southern Alberta has been criticized is because the government has a water conservation objective of 45% of natural flow, and many environmental groups say that with present management that is a dream, which is unlikely to be realized. What would the effect of the proposed management scheme be on the attainment of water conservation objectives in the Bow River system?
Well, we used Bassano as a proxy for that, right? So we tried to meet Bassano's WCO as best we could, with the assumption that if the water's going down through Bassano, it's also going down through the upper stretches. We did actually try a simulation where we attempted to meet the WCOs fully 100% of the time, and I think we ran out of water in 1940 or 1936, something like that. So we were not able to simulate a run where you could meet the WCOs fully.
It's also important to realize that when you set in-stream flow targets, you can meet them most of the time and stress the system occasionally, which is what happens naturally. And you will often find, in my experience in many systems, that you can meet these targets most of the time as long as you are willing occasionally to go below them, and going below them occasionally is not ecologically disastrous in most cases. I've had many cases in which fisheries experts have asked for, as a minimum flow, more than the dependable yield of the dam. You run a simulation which only they use the water, they run out of water, and they say, well, we don't want that. And they say, okay, let's talk about what we can have. And when you do that, things get much nicer.
If you recall the hydrograph slide that I had up during the wintertime, it's about 220% of the natural flow rather than 45% of the natural flow. And so obviously in some other times of the year, you're not going to be able to match that flow. What we did do is during the low flow periods in the August-September period is to increase it quite substantially from what it otherwise would be and still achieve all of the goals that we described.
And it is, as Peter showed in his graph, sort of maximizing the utility of water across the board.
Question?
I wanted to ask about the water quality perspective of things. as you know, right now, there is a phosphorus loading team looking at phosphorus concentrations downstream on the Bow River, trying to look at point and non-point source contributions and reduce loading. But I'd noticed that one of the modeling objectives could possibly be to look at increasing flows to adjust phosphorus and oxygen concentrations. So I wonder if somebody could address that a little bit more.
Well, first off, I want to say that we're actually in the middle of a project now that is trying to look more at that. I actually just got a report back that gives me more information about that, but I haven't had a chance to read it yet. So ask me again in a week, and I'll give you more information. But we are aware of it. With the existing Bow River model, we did not have enough information to really get a good phosphorus DO relationship going, because I mean that's really what the phosphorus is getting at, right? It's dissolved oxygen. I mean, it's other issues too, but in the absence of that, we sort of just assumed that if we kept flows sort of close to historical levels, that we would do okay. I mean, it was the best we had at the time, but we are trying to improve it.
It's going to be a continuing challenge, obviously, but, you know, as you say, we can modify the river, particularly if you're doing it in real time as opposed to what Mike described as Robo River, which was just the model doing it at its own thing. We did at the end take our preferred scenario with some stress tests actually and give it to Alberta Environment to run through their water quality model, and it showed, you know, there's no significant harm and actually some improvement. But again, that's Robo River. I'm sure we can do better than that if it's actually managed.
Speaking of real time, we have a question that's just come in from the outside, from online. If 80% of Bow River flow is snowmelt, how easy or available is snow data, and how could data be improved to assist better system modeling?
Mike?
Go ahead.
The far mic.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, snow data is available in the Bow Basin, like all data sets in the world and Canada. In this part of the world especially that I've noticed is they're not necessarily complete, but they are there. They give us an indication of, especially in the Bow, what the snowpack's like on any given year. There's always a need for more data, but that's of course limited by resources. Second part of the question was?
How to improve?
Again, more data. I think the availability of data is key. If you have it, you can use it. Models are only good as the data that you feed into them. So if you have garbage going in, you get garbage coming out. So obviously the more data and the better the data that you have going in that can feed these models, the better off your modeling results are going to be. This particular model that we use, the OASIS model, doesn't directly take snowpack, but what you can do is take a physically based model, rainfall runoff model, and model the hydrology of the system, and then input those results into an OASIS type model to see how changes in hydrology would impact stream flow, and then model the operations from there.
We're going to be looking at that a lot more in the next phase that Mike said was announced this morning. Also, I don't know, I'll assume that that's either John or Bob on the line. I think there's a tremendous amount of recent research about how snow behaves under various conditions and land cover that I think is going to be really important for us to build into the next phase of the model.
And finally, one of the reasons that the operators in the drought simulation, where the operators ran the model using the Robo River as guidance, but then modifying the operations, one of the reasons they did better, I believe, was that they were also given snowpack information and a forecast that was based on historical snowpack information for the year that we ran. And they used that information in real time. So the results that we are presenting here are not the best that can be done. And implementing this in a real-time situation will do even better.
Yes, one last question.
You mentioned some social benefits from this project, and I was just wondering if you could expand on those and who is really involved with the social benefits.
Go ahead.
Well, I mean, the most obvious performance measures that come to mind for that are sort of more things along recreation sides, but there's also, and so we had some performance measures about rafting, which obviously gets a whole lot better when you've got water coming out of Pocatera. There's also consideration for the trout fishery, in Kananaskis, which has a lot of potential. I mean, as well as it's done, if you give that adequate water supplies, just imagine what it can be. But I think I'm all but certain Mike Kelly wants to say something.
Yeah, the increases in rafting and kayaking, where the Olympic team trains and so forth, were increased by depends on dry and wet years, right? But it was like 10 to 30 days, and in the short season that we have, 10 to 30 days is a lot of improvement. The aesthetics, the idea was to retain the flows through Calgary, where it is a relatively steady flow, and we had a minimum flow through there under all conditions. I live in Cochrane, where it is peak power, and the river goes up and down on a daily basis, and the idea is to retain that flow for the long run through Calgary was another one. So I think that's an important one as well.
I'm shaking my head because these guys are missing the point.
Okay.
This guarantees a
first time.
reliable water supply for all of the residents of the entire basin. That's an enormous social benefit, just right there.
I have actually one more thing that I want to say too that takes it back to my major point, which was the process here is a huge social gain, right? Getting people who are really interested in this and who control the major licenses, getting them in a condition where they're talking to each other and they're talking to environmental interests and maybe people who don't have licenses at all, right? And getting that conversation going is another really big gain.
We have one very brief comment.
I just have a brief question about what you mentioned, the difference between consensus and unanimity.
Sure. Consensus, the difference between consensus and unanimity is, unanimity is everybody says, yay, we're all good with it. Consensus means everybody will accept it, but they don't necessarily agree that it's the best thing for them. But it basically, consensus is, I won't object. Unanimity is, we're all for it.
Okay. The last 2 minutes raised what I saw as an inevitability this morning, which was deciding which shear would have the last word. I have detailed instructions for the audience. I'd like you to stay where you are. I'd like you to thank the panel, but we are going on immediately with the second part of this morning's presentation. So thank you to this panel, and they're dismissed. It's my pleasure now to introduce Dr. David Eaton from the Lyndon Baines Johnson School of Government, Public Affairs at the University of Texas in Austin. As many of you know, Texas has just come through last year one of the most staggering droughts imaginable, and he's going to be talking to us about interbasin transfers, Texas style. So I think it'll be a very interesting talk, and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let's see if I can work this. How does this work? Other way. No. Can you see it? Point this to the back of the room? Right arrow. Oh, no, I'm trying to get the arrow to move here. Oh, okay, very good. Well, thank you very much for inviting me. It is a pleasure to be here. It is a certain pleasure to follow the previous presentation. I followed Dan at Johns Hopkins, and he's influenced my attitude towards water ever since when we were students, and I've known his son since birth, so it's really a pleasure to see what a remarkable fellow you've become. So really, I'm going to be talking about something that is very similar in concept, but slightly different. This is a circumstance where interbasin transfers is something that I gather in Canada is something that is something you really can't discuss. In Texas, we do have to deal with these items, but I'm going to talk about a particular case in which also by not consensus but unanimity, very different interests were able to come to closure on an interbasin transfer which ended up yielding more water to the exporting basin. as a result of the interbasin transfer, and discussing that process. So I've listed the folks involved. Let's see if this will, no? Oh, gee, this is awful. Well, I'm having trouble. What do I do? Push the bottom one back? Okay, well, let's see now. How do I get the arrow? Okay, so this is a joint project of the LBJ School of Public Affairs and also the Lower Colorado River Authority. The Lower Colorado River Authority is the major water holder for this basin and involved additional students other than these listed, particularly Seta Timur. So I hold this to the back and it switches. Okay, so we'll be talking about an interbasin transfer that was approved by both the exporting and importing basin authorities and by the state, the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, that is responsible for water rights. There were not only no objections, but in fact there was enthusiasm among all the basin water users, downstream farmers, midstream cities, upstream lake interests, the importing water users, environmentalists. Everyone was enthusiastic with the result. And it really follows a similar kind of logic to what the previous presentation, but there are a couple of differences in this circumstance, but here are the takeaways. Dispute prevention to examine the options. The idea in this project was to go in to prevent any disputes because the consequence of disputes was the opportunity costs of significant delay. Win-win for each stakeholder. It's not enough for people to be no worse off. We wanted everybody to be significantly better off through the interbasin transfer. And finally, proof through ex post water accounting. It's not enough to show the benefits in a modeling sense, but to prove it ex post, to show, in effect, to be able to go to court and show that the benefits that are articulated, in fact, can be achieved in reality. And that's a process we're just about finished with at this time. This work began in 2005 and has continued till now. The project's implemented, but we're doing the ex post evaluation. So let's see if I can get this. Okay, the difference between this project and the one you've just heard about, or two key differences, is that first, the Texas legislature said that they thought it would be a good idea for this interbasin transfer to occur. So the parties were already potentially at odds. The three major interests, the lake upstream, the major cities, and the downstream irrigators, the folks were getting ready to sue each other if this went forward. But the legislature said that the Lower Colorado River Basin ought to consider providing water to the Brazos River Basin, which is next to it, because of the rapid development in the Austin region. But the legislature set up some conditions, which made it even more complex, because they said that there has to be no net loss to the exporting river basin. In other words, the exporters couldn't lose anything, but they didn't define what that meant. And no process was defined to develop outcomes or measure other performance levels. So we had to go through, of course, the same process. This is the temporal history of it. Began in 1999 when the Texas legislature, whoops. Okay, let's see. Can I get that back? Okay, so it began in 1999 with the Texas legislature authorizing in principle the transfer. The LCRA signed a contract saying if we can meet the performance, we're prepared to go through and export it. The TCEQ, which is responsible for water quality permitting, said in principle they were willing to do it as long as the parties agreed. And so I came into this working, I was in effect given responsibility for the public outreach, trying to bring people together. We began in 2005, and within a year we came to the recommendations, and then another year to the implementation plan, which was adopted in 2007, and it's been updated in 2009, and right now we're going through the ex post evaluation of the water savings. So that's the history. Let's see if I can, okay, here's the river basin. And I'll go through the legal history as well, because I thought that was a very helpful way to begin the last time, and so I hadn't planned to, but I will, because it's a great orientation. Okay, here we've got the Colorado, this is the Texas Colorado, not the Colorado in Colorado. This is the Texas-Colorado River Basin, and the major water rights holder is the Lower Colorado River Authority. They control a series of highland lakes, and so the folks who are upstream here like to have the water being at a stable level so they can have recreation. This is a major economic force in the region. We've got some major cities from Austin further down that that are growing rapidly. Austin was the second largest, had the second largest rate of growth of American cities over the last census. But we've also got some major water uses downstream for rice irrigation. These are the 4 irrigation districts that are the major users of water. 70% of the water in this basin is used for rice irrigation, and they are the oldest water rights holders. Now, fortunately, the Lower Colorado River Authority purchased these irrigation districts, so they hold those rights, so they could manage the water, and they didn't have to deal with other institutions in terms of the more senior water rights. So, in effect, this sets up the conflict between the highland lakes wanting to have nice, stable water there, the cities, and the irrigation districts and the farmers very concerned about their water. And the farmers have a right to be concerned because their water rights, except for Garwood, which is the oldest district, these other districts, their water rights depend upon the volume of flow in the river. And this year, for the first time ever, the irrigators, except for Garwood, they've all been shut off. There is no water available for rice farming this year. And so this has always been a possibility. The water is contingent upon availability, and this year, because the drought is the worst single-year drought we've ever had, it reached the point where the operational rules for the river basin said we're having to cut them off. So that's a complication. So we've got that history of water rights in the basin, and then the control by the LCRA, but all of these parties have a great history of being unhappy with one another. The Highland Lakes are very upset with the farmers for always wanting water for rice farming. The rice farmers have a active, productive, successful farm production. And the cities, of course, are growing incredibly. So the strategy was, is it possible to come to closure? Is it possible for all the parties to agree? And we wanted to make it unanimous. We wanted to make it enthusiastic. Can they agree rapidly and avoid having to sue each other? And we had one other limitation, which was not the case in the Bow River. The Lower Colorado River Authority has an underlying model for the Lower Colorado River, but they did not wish to allow users to play with it because they both are energy and water distributors, and they view it as something that is a marketable product that they need to be able to assure that they can handle economically the challenges with regards to energy or water. They were not willing to share the model. So without access to a model, can we get folks to agree? That was the challenge, and within a year, we were able to do it, and I'll go through the steps and talk about the consequences. The other element, there's another element that's different here. We actually wanted to implement. So it's not enough to just have a plan, but it has to go to the point of being implemented and then evaluated, and that's what's going on, and I'll be able to describe the whole process. Okay, let's see if I can get it to go. Okay, so the transfer here's Austin. Let's see. Here's Austin. Here's Williamson County. This is the adjacent river basin, the Brazos River Basin, and the water can, in principle, be transferred very easily. Here's one of the Highland Lakes, and it's possible to have a very short pipeline which could take the water. It can be treated up at the lakes and brought to Williamson County, which is very rapidly growing just north of Austin. And so the intent of the House Bill 1437, which guided this process, said no net loss, no adverse effects. It has to be reliable, affordable, and sustainable, but provided no definitions of what those mean. And that would be, of course, what suits would be about if they move forward. Okay, so the strategy was to prevent all disputes if we could, examine all options, use all criteria to evaluate options through a public process. We wanted to improve upon no net loss by having the exporting basin gain water. We wanted to have no harm to any stakeholder, everyone be unambiguously significantly better off, reliable, affordable, sustainable, and we wanted to have annual accounting to document outcomes. So this was sort of where I set out saying to LCRA, this is where we ought to go if you want to be successful. Shall we proceed? And they said, sure, let's give it a shot. Okay, so we had a study, 2004 to 2007. The outreach was 2005 to 6. 6 to 7 was looking at developing the implementing plan, and now between 2009 to 2012, we've been doing an ex post water accounting process. So let's go through the steps, if I can get this to move. Okay, so first of all, this is a very odd thing to try and do. We're trying to maximize the utility to the society, but also to all its individuals. It's an impossible thing to try and do, but it was expected. This is really where we started out. We wanted to be able to get to that point. And as Dan pointed out, it's not a zero-sum game in water. It can be achieved. We wanted to have a very transparent environmental policy, and we did exactly the same kind of process as you heard in the last hour. We wanted to move from preferences, from what people want to do, from performance measures to objectives, constraints, alternatives, use the objectives and preferences to select alternatives, and finally measure performance through implementation. Okay, so can we assure all stakeholders can benefit significantly while also having an efficient solution? That was the challenge. And can we develop a methodology to do this entirely on a voluntary basis? So nobody's coerced, there's no voting, it's purely people expressing their own preferences and their own statements that they feel better off based upon the performance measures. So I think I'll just jump ahead. Let's see if there's anything here. Nope, same sort of thing. Okay, so the strategy was really to go out and talk to stakeholders. We decided there'd be about 3 rounds of going out. The first round is we would go out to stakeholders with nothing. Same strategy that you heard the last session, and asking people what are the performance measures that they think are important, what would they like to see achieved. We wanted them to develop their operational measures of everything. We wanted them to identify all alternative ways of having this water transfer. The legislature, in its wisdom, has said that 25,000 acre feet for up to 25 years. And so that was where we started off, and we're saying to all of the stakeholders, I guess I can see it down there, good. We wanted to have all the stakeholders, what ways can that water transfer occur? Anything from groundwater development to desalination. They could suggest any technical means, and we would investigate it. We also wanted them to express their performance measures in any terms that they wished. And so we came up with a very large number of technical alternatives, a very large number of performance measures, and we had an engineering firm that was involved to help quantify and describe all of those elements. So the strategy is we're going to talk to everybody. We're going to capture what is important to them. We are going to capture it verbatim and then show everybody all of the alternatives, all the data, all the analysis, and be open to their suggestions and their questions. Let's see. So we've got the 25,000 acre feet. Okay. So the public participation process. We have a full menu of public participation outreach strategies. Website was key because all the interviews, all the focus groups, all the discussions, we captured every word that anybody said, any questions that they had, any things contributed over the web without listing the person's name, but we captured those issues on the website. So anybody could see the state of play anywhere down the line, so that people recognized they were heard completely. it was there. So the website was a key element. And then we had this 3 rounds of outreach to all of the parties, and really that meant 3 parts of the river basin for upstream, middle stream, and downstream. This is the report that came out in 2007 as a joint product of the LCRA and the LBJ School. So round 1, we solicited concerns, definitions, technical options, objectives. Round 2, evaluate the draft assessment and responses. Round 3, consultation to address any and all issues that would arise with respect to proposed implementation. Because, as I mentioned, the idea was not only to come to unanimity and enthusiastic support, but also to move towards and actually implement what was necessary to, what would implement the project in the field. So this is these are the number of meetings and the number of people that we had. We advertised public meetings. People could come and speak. They could also learn, see this was also available on the web, and so we had a lot of people participate through the web. So these are some of the numbers that we had coming to our 2 rounds, the first 2 rounds of meetings. Let's see. And here are the number of comments that we got over the web. So we had those level of comments from people in the basin. The first stage, as I mentioned, was trying to get people's, what their preferences would be. And I can't go through all of it because I don't want to spend the time, but I will talk about 4 elements that might be of interest to you. One is the development of a definition of no net loss. The key thing here is how would one be able to know that the exporting basin is gaining water, or it has no net loss, that it's not losing any? And that required thinking through, well, what would that operational definition mean? The list of technical options. How do you get 25,000 acre-feet to be transferred between the Colorado Basin and the Brazos Basin? The objectives or the performance measures to evaluate those options, and the responses to any concerns, because it's not enough to have those. People have very particular concerns that fall outside the performance measures and fall outside the technical options of moving the water. And we wanted to be able to address all those elements. So first, on no net loss. I'm not going to go into much detail. This provides some information on the no net loss discussions. We had an initial definition that there was something implied in Bill 1437, but not very explicit. But we had a number of comments that were very specific and operational. There's an agricultural committee of the farmers. They had a very specific definition of no net loss that they wanted to achieve. So we had all of these different views of what is no net loss, and we wanted to try to find a means that would reflect and capture and be able to achieve all of their goals in this. The technical options, I'll go through some of these later. You probably can't read it back there, but there's a website that you can see it, and I'll show some things later. But we had 18 different strategies initially for being able to get 25,000 acre-feet. So it went all the way from desalination to groundwater development, very specific things. These all came from stakeholders. So none of this was proposed without stakeholders. And we had a series of evaluation criteria. So we had 12 different criteria that people thought were important, and they all had operational performance descriptions associated with each of them. Okay. But in addition to that, having those elements, we also did capture specific concerns. So on the website, we had the verbatim statements. We then converted that to very specific. This is from the Williamson County, which is the importing basin, the agricultural committee. From each interest, we captured and put in simple wording their concerns and made sure that we were correctly capturing all of their concerns, having nothing to do with performance measures or the technical alternatives, but particular things that worried them. Here's the Sierra Club. The environmentalists were an integral part of it. They had a lot of concerns Since they weren't water users, traditionally they would not be considered stakeholders, but from our perspective, they had to be fully satisfied as well. Here's some more of the specific Williamson County concerns. I guess a key one that later motivated a lot of the study had to do with specifying a reasonable fixed maximum surcharge. They know that it's going to cost the money to have the water imported. They wanted it to be operational in terms of what's it going to cost us above what we now have to pay. How much is it going to cost us exactly? So, that is not something about either the performance measures or the objectives. It's really how does it translate into their water rates? So that's an example of a concern. In addition, we had a couple of other stakeholders in this game, the TCEQ, the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. Even though they're not party to it, they had very specific preferences in terms of meeting their approval for a water management plan. And we had, in addition, the Texas legislature that was looking over our shoulders. So these were all the different stakeholders we had to satisfy. Okay, so once we had the first round of meetings, we were able to come up with some operational definitions, some objectives, some alternatives, and we did the analyses. We had the engineering firm run through all of the ways of getting water and how those performed in terms of the different performance measures, and then went out to the public in the second round and said, what do you think about this information? The same sort of thing that Mike was describing. You go out and you're told that you're really foolish. And so the idea is to go out, talk with people, and find what's wrong with this so we can come back and do it better. And so again, I'm not going to go through everything, but I will go through a couple of items that might be of interest to you. One is the definition of no net loss that we developed for the first round. After the first round, the technical options for the 25,000 acre feet per year transfer, the objectives, the screening of options, and the responses to questions. Okay, we developed a very simple definition that we thought might be attractive, that captured the 18 or 19 different concerns that stakeholders had about no net loss. And it's simply that the water that's transferred, you had to at least have either water that was returned to the basin from the transfer, or water that's developed that hadn't been under LCRA control, or conserved water. So this was our first round of straw man definition of what it meant to have no net loss. That we hope from these three sources there'd be more water that would be available to the exporting basin than the importing basin. What was interesting when we came out with this exercise, which correctly incorporated all the concerns that all the stakeholders had, they weren't happy with it. Okay, they weren't happy with it because they said, look, we don't want to just have this be no net loss. We want it to be an asset. And furthermore, we don't really want to count returned water and developed water. We'd like it to be conserved because we really would like to have this water. Anything else here is basically dessert. And so, you go through the process. This is something that people would take very seriously. An outcome if, in fact, you could show conserved water was more than the water that would be exported at any time. In other words, it's just like a bank. If you could conserve more water in any year than you are using, then you're able to basically show you've always got a net balance of the bank. That's what the Highland Lakes people really wanted to see. So we took that into account. That's an example of one of the outcomes. Okay, and here's the definition. Through comments of the stakeholders, they really didn't want to do it on an annual basis. They wanted it on a 3-year rolling basis because it was too complex to try and deal with it on an annual basis. And these became the operational definitions of those. And in doing this, we also developed a series of very specific scenarios so that it was very clear exactly how this would work, how the operating rules how things would be counted. So this is just one example of a scenario. Here you're saving 2,000 acre feet a year, and they're requesting 1,380 acre feet. You've already saved 2,000, you're exporting 1,380. It's a net asset to the Highland Lakes rather than a net loss. So this is describing operationally what it meant to have the conserved water exceeding the exported water. This was the strategy that we eventually adopted in terms of the screening. When we asked people about criteria in the second round of meetings, there were certain criteria that stakeholders felt were far more important than others. And so we ended up having primary criteria that were ones that were considered more important and secondary criteria. So we took those 18 technical options. We took those 18 options. We applied the primary criteria. Only certain alternatives made it through to a refined set of variables. And finally, at the end, we had 6 strategies that passed through the final sieve, which represented they did extremely well on both the primary and secondary performance measures. Okay, the primary screening criteria, again, this is all from the stakeholders. Conservation charge. How much of the recipients of water have to pay to reimburse all costs for the water transfer per acre foot and also in terms of their water rates. Phased implementation. Can the option be phased over time? Everyone recognized that there is both the probabilistic aspect of stream flow, but there's also an uncertainty about the future of what it's going to be. So can this be implemented over the short term to get it started, and can it be implemented over the long term? So they really wanted the option of phasing so that the investment could be very modest at the beginning. Third, accelerated implementation. Can implementation be accelerated if water demands increase? So if the Round Rock area, which is the area where the Dell Corporation has settled most of its employees, if that really grew like Topsy, could you implement more rapidly? So that was an important element. 3, is there participation by third parties or is any permit required? If we were going to have to go and get permits or have third parties, this would mean it would take years because the third parties might not respond. So we wanted to find a solution, this was a primary screening criteria, that basically could be implemented very rapidly without dispute because the LCRA had the legal authority to do it. So that became an important criteria. And does the option meet the no net loss definition? These became the key 5 criteria that we then evaluated the 18 alternatives. Okay, well, this is a pictorial description of that assessment. Again, if anyone is interested, I can provide you with more details. Basically, we decided the easiest way to show this is by saying, does something fully satisfy the criteria? Does it partially satisfy the criteria? Or does it fail to satisfy the criteria? So here are our top criteria, and here are the 18 alternatives, and we're looking across the board. And so basically we want to find those technical options for transferring 25,000 acre feet that would meet the major criteria. And I can go through this if somebody wants it. Then these are our secondary criteria. The volume that we could get out of the process, the reliability, the quality, the cost to the customer, risk, environmental impacts, location, timing, water levels in the Highland Lakes, equity among water users, and permit or other procedural, well, these are all the criteria, including those. But here are the secondary, okay, and here are these are the secondary criteria and the alternatives that made it through. And again, the evaluation, again, the issue of whether it fully satisfies the criteria, partially or not at all. Of course, we had detailed data behind all of this. This was just a way of helping stakeholders see it, and then they could see the reports. Well, what we came after that process is basically there were 6 alternatives that everybody felt were really smart. And they really boiled down to, they were really conservation. That conservation at the irrigation area was so much less expensive. It was the most efficient, least costly alternative for getting that water. And it met all the other criteria. And plus, we could do it short term, we could do it midterm, we could develop an implementation plan, and we could respond to all stakeholder concerns. So the third round of consultations, basically we're saying, here are the 6 options that look good. What do you think of these? What other issues do you have? We went and had those set of discussions. And these are the recommendations that we ended up coming out with. Automated check structures dominate because the LCRA can implement it on its own, has the lowest cost. These are improvements in the irrigation canals in order to conserve water by managing it better within the canals. And then land leveling. It is possible the U.S. Department of Agriculture supports land leveling as a means to reduce the volume of water that you need to farm rice. The estimates at the time were 0.7 acre-foot per acre per year that you could save by land leveling. These came from an experimental plot, so there was a lot of uncertainty about it. And of course, there's an uncertainty about how much you save in any particular year, because in a dry year, if you're conserving, you have a lot more water savings than in a wet year. And of course, if you have no water flows at all, you can't save it all. So we had to consider the probabilistic issues. So land leveling, not only do you end up using less water, but you also improve the value of the farmer's land, and in fact, you get a higher yield by doing that because it's much easier to farm, much less costly to farm. So in effect, these 2 options, the automatic check structures and the land leveling, those were sufficient, and then we looked at a number of different alternatives, ways of managing those 2 options. This is what precision land leveling looks like. It's to be able to farm more effectively. So these are what these 2 options turn out to be. It's possible for the short-term strategies immediately, it's possible to level 14,000 acres to precision land leveling. And by the way, all of this would be done voluntarily. The farmers had complete control as to whether they wanted to be paid or subsidized, as it turned out, to do the land leveling. If they didn't want to do it, didn't have to do it. Purely their choice. And this is what the marginal cost was. 21% in this case in the precision land leveling, the conservation charge. This is what the marginal cost above their existing water rates would be in order to go ahead and implement this alternative. So we looked at the 6 options, and we considered them with both EQIP, which is USDA support. The farmers were going to be asked to support 20% of the costs. We had the option, LCRA had the option of seeking an agreement with USDA to put up 50% of the cost of the land leveling. But of course, farmers were concerned. Do we want to get into a relationship with the USDA? Who wants to work with the feds? So we wanted to examine options where that didn't occur. And then these were the surcharges when we came up with these six alternatives. And this is the kind of table that they saw at the end, where they could see in dollar per acre feet of what the total cost would be for them to have the water delivered to them. So they were able to get that, they were able to get that information. This is information that they were provided in terms, I mentioned, it's a probabilistic issue, because if you have a dry year or a wet year, so we wanted to examine what the water savings would be under different kind of conditions, and those were done because, you know, we've had that experience. This is what the projections of the water demands were at the time. We had no idea, just as the projections were described the last hour, nobody had any idea what it would really be. We then went ahead and went towards the implementation plan. So what to do, who'll do it, when will it occur, what will it cost, what should be the outcomes. So we basically, before that third round of outreach, we actually had a specific plan showing how this would be implemented. And so this is the kind of information that was provided to the stakeholders. This is the potential water transfers by year beginning in 2005, acre feet per year, based on the expectations of demand. These are the acres that would be leveled. This is the number of check structures. This is the total amount of water that would be conserved. right here, and the amount of water produced. So we then were able to show that in terms of the money that was available. Here's the capacity up to 2012, always above the demand. Here's the agricultural fund balance, showing that there was plenty of money for those first few years to do it. We went out to the stakeholders and again asked for them to give us reactions and suggest alternatives. Okay, now I'll go on to talk about this was implemented. Okay, here's again our region. This is a bit more detail of the Highland Lakes with Lake Austin. And the irrigation operations, just for some generic information, 1,000 miles of canals, 50 to 65K acres of rice per year, annual diversions 200,000 to 400,000 acre feet per year for rice farming. We've already discussed that. This is what the recommendation finally evolved to. Here's Williamson County. They're providing money to the agricultural fund that's used for both on-district and on-farm improvements, and the conserved water remains up in the Highland Lakes to be transferred with the strategy that there will always be more conserved water than the water that is that's exported. This is what's actually happened before 2009. These were the fields leveled, the acreage, the cost, et cetera. We had in 2009, as planned, the next stage was to do an additional implementation. And so the next stage, which is where we are now, is to prove that water's saved and where it's saved. What is the value of a particular investment in water conservation? If you do the check structures in the canal, how much do you save? If you level land, how much do you save? If you do other investments, do you save water because farmers are smarter, or do you save water because you do the infrastructure? We wanted to be able to tease this out empirically with such quality that if somebody wanted to take it to court, it would stand because it was very rigorous. And we're just about finished with this. We'll be finished. We've been doing this since 2009, gathering data. Here are the kind of things on the farm that we're looking at. The verification program. We want to see how much water savings does precision leveling provide. Does the levee type, there are both contour and straight levees, multiple inlets, does that save water? Is there an impact of rice variety, of farmer skills, and of ownership to the management, to these elements? This is only the on-farm, and then we wanted to hold for control effects, looking at rain and evapotranspiration. So it required the development of statistical tools to tease all of that apart over time, and what's complex is, what makes it more complex, is that you don't farm every piece of land every year. So this is an aerial photograph of the region, of the farming region which we're doing this. And each year, different plots are, a couple more minutes? Okay, sorry, I'll be finished just a second. Sorry, went on. So we looked, we have to in effect, well, I won't go through the logic of the statistical method, but basically it teases it all apart. We can show that there is significant water savings from the laser land leveling, but not as much as people had anticipated. The research in a controlled agricultural experiment station was 0.7 acre feet per acre. The reality is much less. It's just a bit, the expected amount of conservation on average is basically 0.3. So the assumptions, you have to find the savings. Does it come from somewhere else? We looked at straight levees versus contour levees. We didn't find any difference in the water savings, even though agricultural experiment stations found that you'd have much more water savings with contour levees. Didn't occur. Well, we looked at, I'll just quickly skip over this. Let's see if I can make this move faster. Well. And finally, multiple inlets. We were able to identify some water savings from multiple inlets. This is important because, again, in experimental stations, they're able to have many multiple inlets, but in operating farms, they have far fewer, so we wanted to see where there are real savings. So we've gone element by element trying to show water savings. Here's another illustration, farmers who cash rent. If someone cash rents, they actually use less water than the people who either own or who don't cash rent. And so the share rents, here we have the cash rent, and in general, they save water by the ownership strategy. Okay, and the other findings, there were certain aspects about hybrid rice. Okay, and where we are now is we've done these surveys. Basically, we've done on 90% of the farmers, detailed surveys exactly about the farming practices. We have data on the water use crop by piece of land where they're farming, and we're constantly improving the data. And so this year we'll be able to finally show where the savings occur, so that it'll be possible to show that in fact the conservation does achieve the goals. And since they're gathering this data, they can do it in the future in case anyone has any future concerns. So I'll bring it to a close and say simply that the effort here was to get everyone to agree enthusiastically about an interbasin water transfer, to implement it, and then be able to evaluate it. And I think the principles that in the last session are the same. You need to work from the stakeholders. They're the most knowledgeable people. When they take leadership in advocating for a solution, you don't need to have the outside analysts. You really want the leadership from within each of the user groups, and in this case they did. Thank you.
I'd first of all like to thank David very much. I'm now going to exercise the arbitrary power that I could only dream of during the 7 years I was Dean of the Law School. As moderator, I'm going to invite people to address the questions to David over lunch, because we do have a very special guest now, and we need to make time for that. So thank you very much for the presentation, David, and I'm sure there'll be questions on a more casual basis. So next we have a special guest who I think is about to emerge through the door. Kim Sturgis is taking care of that. My timing wasn't quite perfect for... Hi, Kim. Well, thank you, everyone. It's my great pleasure today to welcome a special guest, the Honourable Diana McQueen. Diana McQueen was elected to the Alberta Legislature in March 2008 as member of the Assembly for Drayton Valley, Devon. Last October, she was appointed as Minister of the Environment. 17 days ago, she was re-elected as MLA for Drayton Valley, Devon, and on Tuesday, she was appointed to the new or reintegrated portfolio of Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Resource Development. Minister, thank you very much for joining us today. We appreciate your interest, and I know the audience is keen to hear from you, so thank you very much.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's a real honor to be here and to join you, and I want to thank the University of Lethbridge, first of all, for hosting this conference, and certainly your topic today is very important to Alberta and Canada, and certainly around the world, so I'm very pleased to join you as well. Earlier this week, as you said, I was appointed Minister of Environment and Sustainable Resource Development, and I'm really looking forward to working with Dr. Mike Mahone and to learn more about this very issue. The question of how we can best manage water as a global community of 7 billion is an extremely important one. And answering it will require a kind of collaborative thinking, innovation, and action demonstrated at this conference. I'm particularly pleased that you are addressing environmental monitoring here today, a topic that is of tremendous importance to many people in Alberta, around the world, and certainly our ministry. And I'm very glad that Ron is going to be presenting today. Our province has been blessed with a rich ecological heritage, including a plentiful supply of water that plays an integral role in the growth of both our province and our economy. Balancing this growth with the continued protection of our environment is the work of the newly created ministry, Alberta Environment and Sustainable Resource Development, which I am so very proud to be part of the team. This ministry merges the work of two prior ministries and reflects the complex nature of environmental and resource management. To ensure that this management is based in fact, we operate a variety of monitoring programs and projects across the province. Many of these programs have been in place for decades, helping us to gather the information necessary to identify risks and pursue goals in the long term. The policies informed by this information have made Alberta a national and global environmental leader. And part of that reason why we've retained this leadership role is our ability to adapt and to grow. The environmental landscape is dynamic, and our capacity to monitor and understand that landscape has to be just as adaptable. As Alberta's oil and gas sector has grown and continues to grow, the public has raised concerns about our ability to measure and mitigate the effects of those industries on the environment. Alberta Environment and Sustainable Resource Development has heard these concerns, and as you may know, we recently responded with plans for a new, comprehensive environmental monitoring program for the oil sands region in partnership with the federal government. The program is designed on a 3-year schedule, which will build on already existing federal, provincial, and regional environmental monitoring programs. The first stage will focus on increased sampling locations, parameters, and frequency of for water, layer, and biodiversity. We expect improvements in the joint plan to be fully operational by 2015, a timeline of rapid innovation that reflects the importance of this issue for Albertans. Ultimately, this transformation will help us to improve our understanding of the current state of the environment and enhance our ability to detect environmental change and better manage cumulative effects through a province-wide environmental and monitoring system. We are confident that this system will meet the most progressive and comprehensive of any industrialized developed region in the world. Currently, our group is working together, and it's led by Dr. Howard Tennant, is examining options on how we can achieve these goals. I am looking forward to their ideas, and I'm sure our speaker today, Ron Wallace, who also is a member of the working group, will touch on this further as well, and we're looking forward to hearing that. I will only add that I've asked the working group to look at all implementation options to ensure we have the very best monitoring program for the province of Alberta. The Alberta government and Premier Redford know how important proper monitoring is for our province to ensure the continued success. We have created a new monitoring CEO position, which will be filled by Ernie Huey, formerly the Deputy Minister of Environment and Water. I personally have seen and enjoyed Ernie's commitment and understanding of this important issue, and I know he will do an outstanding job for us in this role. Together, the working group and monitoring CEO will ensure Alberta's environmental monitoring system is credible, transparent, and scientifically sound. Public transparency and involvement will be paramount importance at every step of the implementation process. All information gathered by the monitoring program will be publicly available, and Albertans will be notified of decisions made about the implementation process as they are finalized. Finally, we will continue to encourage vigorous public dialogue and about environmental protection in Alberta, and we believe that it is crucial to both the success of public policy and the health of democracy. With that in mind, I certainly look forward to the discussion today, and again, I want to thank the University of Lethbridge for their outstanding achievements all the time, but putting this together, I think it is so important that we're having this discussion. Thank you for letting me join you.
And again, our thanks to the Minister for her interest and her attendance, and our congratulations on your re-election. And the Minister will be staying with us over lunch, so I hope there'll be more opportunity for interchange. Thank you very much. It was terrific. It was terrific.